Hello everyone, this is Roger Brogan, and today we're going to clean up some code based on a prior video and blog post that was just creating an echo bot in F sharp. So this is the code that we ended up with last time, and let's just walk through this a little bit and I'll explain why I'm not super happy with this. One of the things that's a bit tricky with using F sharp to write these bots using the bot framework from Microsoft is that the SDK that we're using is targeted at C sharp. So C sharp has the concept of asynchronous tasks, and in F sharp we have the concept of async, but async is a different animal, right? There's similarities but slight differences. For example, asyncs don't start immediately, they can be started later. When you get a task in C sharp, the task is typically already started. Also, cancellation tokens can be handled a little bit differently. So that makes that makes for a little bit of friction in between both of the environments. So, but it's really critical that when we execute things, for example, when we call this get async method here, that actually returns in this instance our counter state. It's really important that we can use this let bang operator instead of just the regular let, because inside of the async computational expression, this is the same as, well, not the same as, but has the same functionality as a wait in regards to we're not going to get to this next line here until state has been retrieved asynchronously. Okay, so that's a critical important thing. And these other things where we're setting things asynchronously, and especially when we're saving changes and we're sending activities, we want these things to go ahead and go and perform their activities asynchronously, potentially on a background thread or different thread, and then we want it to exit cleanly. So one of my first takes at this, which you can see at the bottom of the code, was just to say, hey, maybe I don't need all of that async stuff. Let me see if I can just do this by just dispensing with all that and just calling the methods directly. Now, this technically works, but I'm not convinced that there's not some sort of strange race conditions or something that might not actually work correctly in this. And specifically the areas that also give us a little bit of friction when I want to make sure that I actually have this state returned after an async call, I need to await the task and then run it asynchronously. Okay, that's the only way to really guarantee that I have that before I come to the next step here to get the types correct. So this is a little bit of extra friction that I'm not really happy with. And just calling the rest of these and just piping them to ignore and hoping that they execute in the correct order. Not really happy with that either. And the same with sending the actual activities, which have this little quirk here that you actually need to cast those back to task, because even though the framework doesn't really do anything with it, it expects this method to return a task. Now, another thing that I left, which you can see that I switched here, is I switched over from using if statements to using pattern matching, which is more idiomatic F sharp. So I definitely want to continue with that. But in my original example, I just left the if in there. Okay. So what can we do that's a little bit better? We want to not, this is more idiomatic F sharp. It's still got a little bit of friction here, and I'm concerned about this not executing in the correct sequence. So this is not a good solution, even though it looks a little bit more idiomatic F sharp wise. And this one up here is, there's a lot of friction, right? I had to create this await task void, which takes a task and returns an async unit so that we can then await on that and then ignore it. So that I had to tack that on the end of all of these little guys here that I just wanted to go out and do. The do bang operator here will actually go execute these and then not continue on to the next line of code until that's successful. So we want that behavior. We want to program in an asynchronous style, or program using the asynchronous calls here, but do so essentially in a synchronous style, which is what the await keyword and the async keyword gives us in C sharp. So this is getting closer, but I'm not really happy with having to pipe all of these out to either awaiting these tasks here and doing this whole thing, wrapping up an async, starting as a task, piping it back to a task, and then all of these just kind of extra friction where I'm just adding all these extra methods onto the end of everything. So can we do a little bit better? I did a little looking around and trying to see what some other frameworks, and some of the other frameworks that work with .NET like Giraffe or Saturn use this little guy. And this little guy is the TaskBuilder. And TaskBuilder is from these guys, originally in 2006, Robert Peel. And that was the goal was to give us that, the operator resolution and backwards compatibility for tasks inside of F Sharp. So you can go out here, this is out on GitHub. You can just search for TaskBuilder and pull this up. And he says, hey, I'm not going to package this up as anything like a NuGet. You can just kind of pop it in your code and do that. So that's what I did. I just went and downloaded that and stuck that in here. And then I use this task to come up with ideally a little cleaner implementation. So here's an implementation of onTurn async using task. Now, it didn't go quite as seamlessly as I would have hoped because this send activity, even though you typically don't do anything with the result of this, it does actually return a resource response instead of just a regular old task. So to make F Sharp happy, you need to kind of pipe that over to a task because when you use the do bang, it's expecting a task. Now the rest of it gets really nice. We can do just the let bang operator here with get async, and this returns a task of counter state, and we can see it's automatically resolved back to counter state, and that's without having to do what we used to do over here, where we had to pipe this await task at the end of everything. So almost every async call, we had to either throw this async wait task or async task void. So that was friction that I was trying to avoid. And so that's accomplished. And the the other ones that just return a regular old task, they work perfectly, right? So you could just do bang, they return a task, and they're happy as a clam inside of this little expression here. And I experimented with different ways of doing this send activity async by actually capturing the response and then piping that into ignore. But to me, that was just more friction than it was worth. Obviously, if you want to get a hold of the send activity and do something with that, the resource response, then you can certainly do that with the let bang operator, get a hold of it and perform some action. But in the simple example here where we're just doing this, we're just, for these, you just need to pipe them into task. Or I guess this is the cast operator, not pipe, sorry. And then the whole thing itself just needs to be cast back to a task. And since it knows that this wants a task as the return type, you can just use this little cast to nothing here. And that actually fixes it up so that it works perfectly well. So if we go ahead and run this and we pull up our bot emulator, right, we've got our turn count working, we've got our echo working, and I inserted that little extra high from F Sharp, which is coming out from right here. And there you have it. So this is, I think, step one in getting this a little cleaner and hopefully, not hurting performance too much because it's not like these are doing a lot of intensive calculations, but these chatbots in theory will need to scale with a high number of requests. So we don't want them holding on to the thread context or anything like that. That's another reason not to do something like this in my original one where we're awaiting the task and then running it synchronously. That's going to hold on to that thread and not let it go back to the thread pool. So we don't want to do that. All right, so here we go. This is the cleanup of the code. I've renamed this EchoBot2. I've got a link out to the GitHub, and thanks for watching.